Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and express your feelings and thoughts in the comments. Have a nice listening time. It was a Friday evening when I decided to take a solo trip to the mountains. Life had been stressful lately, and I needed some time away from everything. Work, city noise, people. I booked a remote cabin deep in the woods, far away from any signs of civilization. It seemed like the perfect escape. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the last beams of daylight fading into the horizon. The cabin was old but well kept, with a rustic charm that instantly made me feel at ease. I unpacked my bags and settled in for the night, enjoying the peaceful silence that surrounded me. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. The first night went by smoothly. I read a book by the fire, had a glass of wine, and fell asleep feeling more relaxed than I had in months. But the next night, that's when things began to feel off. It was around 11 p.m. when I first heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from outside. At first, I dismissed it as the wind knocking branches against the cabin. But as the minutes passed, the tapping became more deliberate, more rhythmic, like someone, or something, was intentionally trying to get my attention. I walked over to the window and peered outside. Nothing. Just darkness and the outline of the thick trees. I told myself it was nothing, probably just an animal passing by. Still, the uneasy feeling crept into my mind. An hour later, I heard it again. This time, the tapping was louder, and it was coming from the back of the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. The cold air hit my face as I scanned the area around the cabin, but again, there was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything that could have made the noise. I decided to go back inside, lock the door, and try to sleep. But as I lay there in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made me more and more paranoid. Suddenly, I heard a voice. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "Come outside," it said. I froze. It was impossible. There was no one else around for miles. I grabbed my phone and checked for a signal. Of course, there was none. The tapping had started again, but this time it was coming from the window, directly next to the bed. I slowly turned my head and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing just outside the window, was a figure. A dark silhouette, almost human but distorted in some way I couldn't explain. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the figure. The dim moonlight barely illuminated its outline, but I could see enough to know something was very wrong. Its head was tilted slightly, as if curiously observing me, but its shape was unnatural, too tall with limbs that seemed to bend in awkward angles. I didn't dare move. My mind raced with every possible explanation. Maybe it was a shadow, a trick of the light, or just my imagination playing games on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, the figure did something that chilled me to my core. It raised a hand and slowly, deliberately, pressed it against the glass. The tapping started again, louder this time, more persistent, as if it was trying to get in. I couldn't stay there. I knew I had to leave the cabin. Slowly, I slid out of bed, careful not to make any sudden noise. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand and headed toward the front door, never taking my eyes off the figure. As I reached for the doorknob, the tapping suddenly stopped. There was silence. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it had gone. Maybe it was just some freak occurrence. But then, I heard the floorboards creak behind me. It was inside. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, to get out of that cabin as fast as I could. Without thinking, I threw open the front door and sprinted into the woods. The cold air stung my lungs as I ran blindly through the trees. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon above, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving, to put as much distance between me and whatever was inside that cabin. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following me. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, like someone or something was stalking me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it again, the same distorted figure moving through the trees, keeping pace with me. It wasn't running. It didn't need to. It just moved, unnaturally fast, gliding between the trees as if the forest itself was bending to its will. My legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to explode, but I kept running. I had no idea how far I had gone when I finally saw a light ahead. In my panic, I hadn't realized I was approaching the road, the only sign of civilization for miles. I burst out of the trees and stumbled onto the road, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked back into the darkness. The figure was gone. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Then, a sound pierced the silence, louder than before, closer. The tapping. I turned to the source of the noise, and to my horror, the figure stood right in front of me, on the road, its form clearer than ever in the light of the moon. Its face, or what I assumed was its face, was a featureless void, a dark expanse that seemed to swallow all light. But I could feel its gaze, cold and relentless, fixed on me. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. It took a step forward, and the ground beneath me seemed to tremble. I backed away slowly, my body trembling uncontrollably, until I felt the cold metal of my car behind me. Without taking my eyes off the figure, I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. But before I could unlock the door, the tapping started again, this time on the window of my car. The tapping on the car window was relentless, like the ticking of a clock counting down the final seconds. I slowly turned my head toward the sound, and there it was, its hand pressed against the glass, the distorted figure now inches from me. In a panic, I threw the door open, jumped inside, and slammed it shut, locking it as fast as I could. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing. I tried again, my hands trembling uncontrollably, the engine sputtering but refusing to start. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel in desperation, my eyes darting toward the window where the figure stood, unmoving, just watching. And then, for the first time, it moved closer, leaning its head toward the glass until its face, or lack of it, was almost touching the window. The tapping stopped. There was a long, suffocating silence. And then, a sound, low and distorted, like a voice from the depths of the earth. "You can't leave." In one final desperate attempt, I turned the key once more. This time, the engine roared to life. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching as the car lurched forward. I didn't look back. As I sped down the dark, empty road, the figure slowly faded into the rearview mirror, its form dissolving into the night. But even now, miles away from that cabin, I still hear it sometimes. The tapping. And every time I do, I wonder if one day it'll find me again.